Chapter 5, Freedom Framework. At this stage, James was already feeling so much better. His days were consistently calmer, he was more relaxed, less stressed, and sleeping better than he had in a long time. From here, he got curious. Why do imposter syndromes strike even though I know I'm good at what I do? He asked. Why would I think I'm not good enough when the evidence shows that I am doing well? This is the turning point in the process of outsmarting imposter syndrome. Once you've broken the cycle of symptoms and dialed down the stress, the next step is to tackle the root cause. The answer to James's questions lies in the brain's internal model of the world, our beliefs. In this chapter, we look at what beliefs are, how they are formed, and what that means for imposter syndrome. We uncover the belief that lies at the heart of imposter syndrome and how it manifests. Then we explore a powerful way to understand others that allows us to release the pain associated with imposter syndrome. Beliefs. Your brain is a prediction machine, according to the latest theories of human consciousness. It's wired to predict what will happen in the next few moments so that you're kept safe and that your brain can manage your body's energy requirements efficiently. The more accurate your brain's internal model, the better it can predict the immediate future. From the very beginning, your brain has been figuring out how your environment works. It creates a vivid internal model of the external world within the quiet darkness of your skull. This internal model includes beliefs about the world. These are your brain's shortcuts to avoid spending unnecessary time and effort analyzing a routine situation. The brain uses 20% of your physical energy, which makes it calorie intensive and was expensive for our ancestors when their calorie intake was uncertain. Therefore, creating beliefs reduces the amount of energy used by the brain, which is positive for human survival in an uncertain world. Beliefs allow you to interact quickly and automatically with your environment, so they're a survival mechanism essential for functioning in the world. When you step out onto a road, for example, you are using a belief that the road is solid and can support your weight. You don't waste time tentatively putting out your foot to test the ground with every step. Such beliefs put everyday interactions on the back burner as far as the brain's concerned, freeing up the thinking mind to pay attention to important new things in the environment, such as potential danger, solving problems creatively, and thriving. Belief is a general term for the brain's shortcuts. Psychologists use the word schema too. You hold beliefs about your physical environment, as I just mentioned. You also hold beliefs that are opinions, such as what's a good stock to invest in right now, or which school would suit your child. Some beliefs are affiliations, such as which is the best football team or political party. Other beliefs are what we hold to be true, including religious beliefs and personal values. We also have deeper beliefs about our identity. Finally, there are beliefs about what constitutes a threat to our survival. We will be focusing exclusively on this last category of belief while discussing imposter syndrome. That is, we'll look at what the amygdala determines as a threat and how our beliefs drive the automatic reaction that we then experience. Developing our beliefs. Our human senses send billions of bits of information to our brains every minute, but a baby's brain is unable to make sense of this. The information is like a huge, undifferentiated mush. As the baby grows, their brain must start identifying distinctions and building its internal model piece by piece. When we're children, our internal model develops primarily through observation and copying. Sometimes we're explicitly taught something, such as social behavior, and we're told this is the way this works. Other times the beliefs we pick up are modeled by the people around us or implied by what isn't said or done. Because we act automatically from our beliefs, we rarely think about them. As children, we don't have an adult's perspective or a sophisticated understanding of the world, so we wouldn't question the beliefs we're adopting or even realize they could be questioned. However, we rarely choose these beliefs deliberately. Therefore, it's no surprise that as adults, We generally never question our belief systems either. If nobody in our family had a particular skill, it's far less likely we will have developed that skill without focused effort ourselves. For example, pick a language that you don't know, say Japanese. If you don't speak Japanese, why not? Because you were never taught Japanese. Or why didn't your parents teach you Japanese? Because they didn't know Japanese, so naturally they couldn't teach it to you. Why didn't they know Japanese? Because nobody taught them. This pattern repeats for all kinds of skills, including navigating relationships, dealing with difficult situations, and in leadership roles. When we attribute our lack of skill, knowledge, or a particular belief to our parents and the environment that we grew up in, this is not to blame our parents. This is not being disloyal, judging, or criticizing parents for what they teach children. The people teaching us were doing the best that they could with the knowledge, beliefs, and resources they had. Other life skills include how we manage our own frustration and anger. If our parents didn't learn how to manage their anger well, there's a good chance we won't know how to deal with our own anger either. Again, there's no blame here. It's just what was demonstrated to us as behavior options when we were children. Some beliefs we are aware of, but most are completely unconscious. While some beliefs are positive, accurate, and helpful, others are not. One belief in particular is the root cause of imposter syndrome. The happy belief. In the 1950s, one of the grandfathers of personal psychology, Dr. Carl Rogers, embarked on a great quest. He wanted to discover the source of happiness, specifically what makes a person happy regardless of difficulties life throws at them. He reviewed his experience with thousands of clients and he found the answer he was looking for. He concluded that real and lasting happiness, freedom from suffering, is caused by a belief in our inherent and unconditional self-worth, instilled from a rare and remarkable childhood. Unfortunately, he also discovered that the vast majority of us, 99.95%, believe the opposite, that our worth depends on what we do. That is, our worth is conditional. Conditional worth says, if I do something good, I am good. If I do something bad, I am bad. It confuses a moral judgment of our actions with a judgment of our innate worth. The belief in our conditional worth is usually unconscious, and so few people express it in this way. It's also a belief that runs through all societies and cultures in the world, so most people don't even notice this belief, nor the negative effect it has on them. The problem with conditional worth is that it leaves our mood, emotions, and sense of self entirely at the mercy of life's circumstances. It then becomes all too easy to dislike, disapprove of, or even hate ourselves. Rogers discovered that the false belief of conditional worth was established in early childhood, but he was deeply disappointed because he knew no way to change that belief in adults. At that time, neuroscience, the study of the brain, was in its infancy. The brain's internal model was thought to become fixed and unchangeable by adulthood. However, in the 1980s, neuroscientists started to agree that the brain is not fixed after all. It has neuroplasticity, which is the ability to change and even grow new brain cells. But by this time, the world had moved on and forgotten about Rogers' groundbreaking discovery. Except, that is, for a few isolated worth coaches and therapists who discovered ways to shift the worth belief from conditional to unconditional. Unconditional worth. The key to happiness, said Rogers, is having a sense of our unconditional worth. That is, what we do, good or bad, has no influence on who we are. This is a radical idea for many people. Here's one way to think about it. Consider the time of your birth. Newly born, you were completely worthwhile, an absolute miracle and a delight. You hadn't done anything to earn that. No words, no actions, and no favors. You were just there and 100% worthy of being loved and cared for. The insight of unconditional worth is that this fact has never changed from the moment you were born until right now. You are still completely worthy, completely lovable, completely adorable, and a miracle. Nothing has changed between then and now. When you believe your worth is unconditional, it frees you to explore your limits of achievement without fear of being bad, wrong, rejected, or unloved. Learning our worth. Rogers found that whether we develop conditional or unconditional worth depends on how we were brought up as a child. Therefore, conditional worth starts early in childhood. Before children develop a sense of self, an I, at between 18 months and 3 years old, they don't perceive boundaries between themselves, their experience, and the world around them. When a small child is told that something they have done is wrong, it is identical in their perception to being told that they are wrong, bad, disapproved of. This is the perfect time in childhood development to be taught that your worth is unconditional. However, if a child is not taught that their worth and actions are separate, then the conclusion their mind makes is that when I make a mistake, my parents are disappointed or annoyed. When I do something wrong, I get told off. Therefore, I must be bad. There must be something wrong with me. I am not good enough. We learned this from the different reactions of our parents and guardians according to what we did. If we were good, tidy, and polite, then we likely got smiles and approval. If we were successful and did well at school, we likely received smiles and approval. Now, some people's childhoods were not filled with smiles or approval. They just got less disapproval for being tidy, clever, or polite, etc. Some people even had cruel or abusive childhoods where approval was minimal or non-existent. You might assume that the degree of approval or disapproval makes a difference to whether we develop conditional worth, but it doesn't. The degree of response is less important than the fact that there was any difference at all between the reactions when we behaved well versus those when we made mistakes. Even a twitch of an eyebrow or a hint of a frown can convey disapproval, and at that moment we feel unacceptable, reinforcing the belief that our worth is conditional. Regardless of which childhood experiences you had, they taught the same belief of your worth being conditional. You learned that it is not enough to be who you are. Conditional worth became part of your identity. So as an adult, you and almost everyone else believe that your worth depends on what you do. Why is this one belief so powerful? Why is it the root cause of whether we're happy and satisfied in our lives or not? The explanation comes from simple biological survival. When a baby is born, and for many years during their childhood, they are completely dependent on their parents and guardians to be looked after. If a child is not cared for, fed, clothed, kept warm, and held, they will die. Biologically, we must be cared for as infants. Implicitly, we must be found worth caring for by our caregivers. This creates a potential danger situation in young brains. If I'm not worth this care and attention, then I will die. It's wholly unconscious. It's unlikely we'd ever say to ourselves, if my parents don't approve of me, I'll die. But the survival fear creates this perception. If we feel unworthy in this way, then it creates strong feelings of emptiness, being alone and unlovable, coupled with a fear of dying. Unlovable if we're not loved. If we're not cared for, we will die. Alone, if we're left alone, if we're abandoned, we will die. The brain treats emotional pain and physical pain as the same. And so the strong emotional pain of conditional worth spurs the brain into trying to do anything to avoid it in order to survive. Survival strategies. The huge feelings of being empty, helpless, alone, and unlovable are so overwhelming for children that they naturally try to find a way to escape them by developing survival strategies. Almost everyone developed these survival strategies. The question is not whether we developed them or not, but which ones we developed. There are 5 major survival strategies. As children, we tried these out, homing in on 1 or 2 as most effective for surviving our individual circumstances. These are power, approval or praise, distraction, safety, drama. Power. We use the survival strategy of power to feel more in control of ourselves and or other people. This might mean we're bossy or authoritarian. We might feel superior or act like we are. In the extreme, power might manifest as bullying. The driver behind reaching for power is to feel strong rather than helpless or weak. You feel more comfortable when you're in charge and in control of yourself, other people, and the events around you. Approval or praise. If your major survival strategy is to get approval and praise, you will be always working to do the right thing. You may tend to want to be right, and you might have tried to be a perfect boy or girl growing up. This is the golden child who's successful and works hard not to be disapproved of. Sometimes they turn to people-pleasing to get approval. When they get the approval from praise, then in that moment, they might feel that they're worthwhile. The problem with praise is that it must be continually earned, which can be exhausting. However, the bigger problem is that your feelings of worth are heavily based on the opinions of others and therefore out of your control. Distraction. The survival strategy of distraction is used to try and escape from our current reality, escaping from the terrible feelings of unworthiness, numbing ourselves so that we don't feel the pain of it. The numbing can be chemical, like using alcohol, cigarettes, or drugs, both recreational or prescription. It can be emotional eating or excessive exercise, or the high of gambling, a sex or shopping addiction, or doing extreme sports. More recently, we've seen addictive video games, compulsive social media scrolling, online porn, and binge watching a box set, all to numb the strong feelings. The driver behind the survival strategy is to escape from feeling empty, afraid, alone, and unworthy. Safety. The survival strategy of safety is controlling the environment around you so that there are no surprises. This makes you feel less vulnerable to changing situations. You might develop a rigid routine and get upset or frustrated if that gets disrupted. You might resist change, be risk-averse, or try to control the environment and the people around you. Unlike the power survival strategy, in which people use control to feel stronger, the safety survival strategy uses control to reduce surprises and increase their perception of safety. The driver is, if I'm more in control of my environment, if I can keep a lock on it, I'm less likely to be harmed. Then I'm safe. Drama. The drama survival strategy is chaos as opposed to rigid routine. It is a loud, high-energy, prima donna approach to the world. It's making a scene and exaggerating emotions. Things are massively amazing or absolutely terrible. It's wanting people to pay attention to you, notice you, and sometimes save you in desperate situations. The driver behind this strategy is, if you pay attention to me, then I can trust I'll be cared for and worthwhile. Drama draws attention. For children, being ignored can be more painful than being punished, and negative attention feels preferable to no attention. Drama again taps into the primal fear of abandonment, which to a baby could result in death. The addictive aspect. All of these survival strategies have a slight addictive element to them, just like drugs are addictive. You get a hit when you first take a drug, later the same amount doesn't give you the same response, so you need more. This also happens with survival strategies. With power, there's a sense of strength and control when you get a promotion at work, for example. But as you get used to that role, you stop feeling the little rush of power as it becomes normal for you. The feeling of strength you were getting from your new position fades, and you want more. This is how people can crave more and more power. People who use the approval and praise survival strategy struggle because everybody gets used to their level of performance. Over time, they get less praise for the same high performance. Then they feel they have to do even better and work harder to earn more praise, which is unending and exhausting. It's the same addictive pattern for distraction, safety, and drama. The urge is always to get continually more to protect ourselves from the painful feelings of conditional worth. We can also jump between different strategies depending on the situation. In some circumstances, power simply doesn't work. So we might have to go to a secondary strategy and seek praise, for example, or distract ourselves. Most of us don't realize these survival strategies are related to the painful feelings of conditional worth. In fact, these behavior patterns appear to be part of our personality, which is incorrect. We develop them as children to deal with difficult feelings and to avoid the emotional pain associated with them. It was our best way of coping. It is crucial to understand that these strategies are used by almost everybody when under stress. The more pressure a person is under, the more activated their nervous system, the more they will turn to their survival strategies. Since most people are unaware of their survival strategies, this part of the behavior is also unconscious. This knowledge is a powerful framework for understanding yourself and other people. When used to develop empathy for human behavior, it becomes a launch pad for accepting yourself and other people and for developing a rock-solid sense of your own unconditional worth. Behavior does not stop at survival strategies, so let's go deeper and look at additional patterns. Compensating behaviors. Sometimes we don't get the response from others that our survival strategy demands, or the situation doesn't allow it. When that happens, we switch to compensating behaviors to try to get back the better feeling we seek from our survival strategy. For example, if we're not getting the approval that we normally get, we might then use the compensating behavior to persuade other people to give us that approval. Again, it's not a deliberate act, but an unconscious pattern driven by the need to avoid the pain of conditional worth. There are 5 major compensating behaviors, either to get something from somebody else or to protect ourselves from a situation. This comes from the work of Dr. Greg Bear, who has been helping adults break free from conditional worth for over 30 years. He identified these 5 different behaviors that people exhibit when they don't get their drug of choice from their survival strategy. The compensating behaviors are attacking, acting like a victim, lying, running, and clinging. Attacking. This is exactly what it sounds like. You might think of it as a physical attack, and certainly any violence or even intimidation would be just that. But it can also be verbal attacks, anger, slander, sarcasm, sabotage, or gossip. Acting like a victim. Acting like a victim is not the same as being a victim. For example, if we're dancing and you step on my foot, then at that moment I am a victim. I have a painful foot because you've stepped on it. However, if I then complain to everybody in the room and tell them what a horrible person you are and a terrible dancer you are, that's acting like a victim. Acting like a victim includes complaining, the sympathy stories that get told over and over again, blaming other people and putting a poor me spin on a particular situation. The idea behind it is to make us the innocent victim and in the right, with the other person or situation being made out to be wrong, bad, or a cruel and terrible monster. Lying. Lying, of course, is simply saying what's not true, but it's also misdirection, evasiveness, and omission. It can be done to avoid attack or punishment, or to manipulate others to get what we want. Running. Running is sometimes physically leaving the situation, such as walking out of the room. It can even be leaving a job or a relationship. Running can be withdrawal, maybe refusing to have a conversation with somebody. It can also be emotional withdrawal, ignoring the other person or being distant with them. Clinging. When we think of clinging, we may think of a child holding onto their mother's leg, not wanting to be left alone or abandoned. As adults, clinging can be pleading, whining, and complaining to make the other person feel guilty for not giving us what we want. Being demanding and manipulating like this is an attempt to prevent ourselves from being abandoned. People use any or all of these compensating behaviors when their survival strategies aren't working or have become less effective. The illustration here shows the whole model put together, starting with the root cause, conditional worth, which creates the internal unconscious discomfort. Neither survival strategies nor compensating behaviors are a deliberate choice, but instead are an automatic reaction to a perceived pain or threat. People doing their best. This pattern of survival strategies and compensating behaviors represents people doing their very best not to feel worthless and terrible about themselves. They're used when someone feels stressed and their nervous system is activated. When you're aware of these patterns, you will observe them in other people as well as yourself. Which survival strategy you use depends on what worked when you were growing up. If you're a parent, you'll know that your children are always testing your boundaries. They experiment to find what works best for them. There's no judgment here. These behaviors don't make you a bad person. Everyone uses them, so there's no need to judge when you see them in yourself. Remember, this is the best option that you could find from the tools you learned from your childhood. When you see survival strategies and compensating behaviors in other people, again, there's no need to judge. This is them doing the best that they can to feel better about themselves, feel more comfortable, and to reduce emotional pain. Freedom. If the only thing you take from this book is an understanding of survival strategies and compensating behaviors and use it to look at people differently, then it will create a radical change in your life. You will immediately start seeing other people's negative actions and emotional reactivity as a result of unconscious internal pain. It is not their personality. They're simply using these patterns. You will know that their style of communication is the best that they've learned. They simply don't have better resources and skills available to them in that moment when their nervous system is activated and their brain is screaming that they're in danger of succumbing to a tsunami of painful feelings. In that moment, they don't see any other options. Later, on reflection, they might see what they could have done differently, but while their amygdala is in alert mode, they simply can't. Other people's survival strategies are not about you. They're just an expression of their pain and discomfort filtered through their beliefs about what is possible for them to do next. This knowledge allows you to step out of victimhood and see others as humans just like you, who are doing the best they can with the resources they have. If you had lived their exact life with all their experiences, with the same beliefs learned and taught, then you would do the same thing they did. When you see the tragedy of being ruled by the belief that worth is conditional, your compassion naturally bubbles up. Going back to CEO Kim, who we met in chapter 2, whose typical stress response was the fight state. When she learned about this framework for understanding people's behavior, she felt like her whole world shifted and settled. She now understood why others behaved as they did, that other people's survival strategies and compensating behaviors, which had instantly triggered her into defensiveness and aggression, were not about her. Breathing a sigh of relief, she saw that their behaviors were not a threat, but rather an expression of pain. This thinking immediately tempered her response. So now she knew the way others behaved towards her was not personal, and so her system was far less easily triggered. This resulted in her meetings becoming calmer, less confrontational, and more productive than ever before. She also applied the insight to herself and recognized that her own anger and defensiveness were an expression of an activated nervous system. This opened the door for her feeling compassion and acceptance of herself. The imposter belief. Although almost everyone operates from the unconscious belief of conditional worth, not everyone experiences imposter syndrome. For most highly successful people, conditional worth manifests in their life as imposter syndrome. The connection between conditional worth and imposter syndrome is clear. Imposter syndrome has at its core the belief, I'm not good enough. And if I'm not good enough, then ultimately it will affect my survival. The amygdala will trigger the nervous system to react whenever you feel not good enough. This creates feelings of anxiety, confusion, isolation, and overwhelm, which is exactly the experience of believing that your worth is conditional. That is, conditional worth is the root cause of imposter syndrome. Knowing this, you can now appreciate why imposter syndrome affects so many people. It's also clear that this is not an aspect of your personality, culture, or gender. The good news is that there are ways to develop a sense of your unconditional worth as an adult. You're not doomed to a life of misery if you didn't happen to win the childhood lottery that would create unconditional worth. When the conditional worth is in the driving seat, life is a roller coaster of ups and downs, of reacting to the situation we find ourselves in. How we feel about ourselves is outside of our control, like a leaf blown in the wind. Our view of ourselves is not stable, which leaves us feeling vulnerable to circumstances. The conditional worth belief leads to knee-jerk reactivity to difficult situations and using survival strategies and compensating behaviors. These are automatic behaviors that are at best unhelpful and at worst destructive. What we want instead is to be flexible and responsive to the environment around us. We want to have confidence and a sense of comfort in our own self and worth. We want to be calm, not reactive. Ultimately, we want to be self-aware and choose the things that are supportive and helpful to us. Most people have no idea that they even have that choice. Eliminating imposter syndrome for good means changing this deep underlying belief from conditional worth to unconditional worth. In this chapter, we've laid a powerful foundation for upgrading our emotional intelligence. With this framework, we understand people and what drives them without making anyone a monster or a victim. It's possible to use this knowledge to change the way that our amygdala perceives threats in the first place. Then our response becomes automatic understanding and acceptance of others and ourselves. This perspective forms the foundation for using a powerful tool that allows us to finally develop a strong sense of our unconditional worth. Let's delve more deeply into that next.